Once upon a time, deep within a distant and mysterious forest, there was a village known as the Happiness-Producing Village, a name that almost no one knew. This village, tucked away in a forgotten corner of time, was surrounded by mountains dressed in every shade of green. In this village lived hard-working dwarves with slender fingers, dressed in colorful, patterned clothes. No one knew exactly when or why they had come to live in this village, just as they didn't understand why happiness was produced there. But to the villagers, it was a simple truth. With the first rays of the morning sun, the mills of the village would start turning, and a wind of happiness would spread to all corners of the world. The mills were powered by a seven-colored water that flowed from deep within the forest. The sight of this water, dressed in greens, blues, purples, and countless other colors, was as mesmerizing as the light reflected off the branches of the trees in the forest. It was said that this water never ran dry. It cascaded down from the mountains like rivers and flowed into the village. And those mountains were the home of a giant. This giant carried the seven-colored water in his enormous buckets to the river, and the dwarves used this water to turn their mills, producing happiness. But one morning, the dwarves were shocked to discover that the water had stopped flowing. The mills had come to a halt. The air had grown heavy, and a gloom had settled over the village. The dwarves looked at each other and realized that there must be a problem at the water's source. The chief dwarf, an elderly and wise figure, gathered them together, and they set off on a long journey toward the mountains from where the water flowed. Days, perhaps weeks, passed as they followed the riverbeds, until they finally reached the foothills of the mountains. And there, at the slope of the mountain, they saw a sleeping giant. His massive body seemed to stretch toward the sky. But as they looked closer, they noticed something under his foot. The giant had stepped on the thorn of a sleep flower. This rare flower bloomed only on the slopes of these vast mountains, and its thorn could send anyone into an eternal sleep. The giant had fallen into a deep slumber and would not wake until the thorn was removed. The dwarves thought long and hard. The thorn was so dangerous that even the slightest touch could send the handler into a deep sleep. The elderly dwarf said, "Only a giant pair of pliers can remove this thorn." They immediately returned to their village and consulted their carpenter. The carpenter worked day and night, crafting a pair of pliers large enough to remove the giant's thorn. The dwarfs carried the pliers all the way back to the sleeping giant. With each step, the weight of the burden pressed down on their shoulders, but they did not give up. At last, they carefully removed the thorn with the pliers, and the giant woke from his deep sleep, stretching and opening his eyes. Once, deep in the forest's most mysterious corners, there was a truth almost no one knew about the source of the seven-colored water. This water didn't simply come from the merging of rivers. The giant carried it from a distant, hidden lake, a deep source of water concealed in the heart of the forest, unknown to anyone. This lake's water was no ordinary water. Each drop gave life to nature, kept the forests lush, energized and healed the animals, and planted joy in the hearts of people. When the dwarves learned that the giant was carrying the seven-colored water from this lake to their village, they felt immense happiness. Now they knew that not only were their mills running, but the entire ecosystem was thriving thanks to the giant's efforts. The giant, upon learning from the dwarves that the water not only brought life to the forests but also powered the happiness mills, spreading joy across the world, felt a spark of purpose in his heart. All those years of silently carrying out this task had served a much greater cause than he ever realized. He wasn't just a giant, he was the source of happiness. The dwarf's mills, powered by the water he carried, spread joy and peace across the globe. With this realization, the giant's heart swelled with excitement. knowing that his work wasn't just for the forests but for the happiness of all living beings and people made him even more determined. If this water can spread happiness, he said to himself, then I must work harder. I must carry more water. The rivers must never dry up, the forests must always remain green, and people must always be happy. The giant, filled with gratitude for the help the dwarfs had given him, was joyful. But the elder dwarf gave him a warning: if you walk on thorny paths again, you might fall asleep once more. So we've made you a suit, clothes, and a vest to protect you. The giant looked gratefully at the gifts the dwarfs had presented him. The dwarfs also offered a heartfelt prayer to ensure that the giant would never again fall into such a deep sleep, and from that day on, the giant worked with even greater determination, carrying the seven-colored water. Even at night, he set out, carrying the water in his enormous buckets from the lake to the river. Every drop reached the mills, producing happiness once again. The water never diminished, and the giant's strong hands carried the water, turning it into an endless source of joy. When the dwarfs saw the giant's dedication, they admired him even more. Not only the forests, but the entire world was sustained by the giant's silent sacrifice. Once again, 3 apples fell from the sky, one for those who heard this story, one for those who read it, and another for those who shared it. The friendship between the giant and the dwarfs continued forever in the depths of the forest, just as the seven-colored water never ran dry. From that day forward, the seven-colored water began to flow into the village once again. The mills turned, the dwarfs continued to work, and happiness spread throughout the world once more. And it all began with a giant walking along a thorny path. 3 apples fell from the sky, one for those who listened to this story, one for those who read it, and another for those who enjoyed and shared it.